They say you can tell the truth 100 times, but it only takes one lie to bury it. That's what happened to Amelie. She was my neighbor. Lived 2 floors above me in that tired old brownstone with the creaky stairwell and paint peeling off the window frames like it gave up trying to be presentable. You could always hear the pipes groan at night, and the heat in winter came and went like a rumor. But Amelie? She was solid. She made the place feel less forgotten. Every morning, like clockwork, she came down those stairs in her teal cleaning uniform, holding a thermos of tea and a tote bag patched up at the corners. Her shoes were worn at the heel but spotless, like the rest of her. Clean, quiet, careful. Amelie didn't move through life like she was trying to make noise. She moved like someone who understood how the world worked, and how much louder it got when you looked like her. She worked at the Crown Meridian downtown, one of those hotels that called itself historic, but had a chandelier in the lobby big enough to feed 20 families. You know the type, glossy floors, polished brass, staff that smiled like they'd get docked pay if they didn't. Amelie had been on their cleaning staff for 5 years. Never late, never written up, never missed a shift. Her ID card had faded around the edges from swiping in too many times. I remember once I asked her why she never applied to the front desk, or tried to move up. She just gave a small laugh and said, "That's not for people like me. I just make the place look good so they can forget who did the work." That hit me harder than she knew. 2 weeks later, her name was on the 6 o'clock news. They said she stole a gold chain from one of the guests. A family heirloom. The kind of thing that gets passed down in velvet boxes and probably never left the owner's neck until the day it disappeared. Room 413, they said. And Amelie had been the last one to clean it. That was all it took. Didn't matter that she'd cleaned hundreds of rooms before without so much as a towel out of place. Didn't matter that she'd once stayed late to help a guest search for a lost engagement ring, only to find it tucked in the bedsheets. Didn't matter that her file had commendations from 3 supervisors. All that mattered now was a missing necklace, and a black woman with keys. "I heard from her niece what happened," said the hotel manager, Mr. Sutherland. "A man who always looked like he thought he was doing you a favor by breathing the same air. Called Amelie into his office just before the end of her shift. Asked her to sit. Said there'd been a report of a missing item. Asked if she'd seen anything. She said no. Calm, clear, like someone with nothing to hide. That's when he told her the police were already on the way. She didn't even get a chance to defend herself. No review, no questions. Just the word of a wealthy guest and the silent approval of a manager who saw what he wanted to see. When the police came, they didn't ask questions either. They put her in cuffs like they were late for lunch. Walked her past the bellboys, past the security desk, past the guests in the lounge drinking cucumber water. Her badge still clipped to her pocket. Her name still spelled right. I saw the footage later that night. Some intern reporter caught it on their phone and posted it online. You could hear people whispering as she walked past. Like watching her get arrested was part of the hotel's entertainment package. One person even clapped. The next morning, her photo was in the paper. Not the kind they frame. The kind they use when they want you to forget a person's humanity. Hotel cleaner detained in jewelry theft. It read. That's all. No mention of her name until paragraph 4. No mention of her years of service. No one from the hotel gave a statement. Just silence. Like she'd never been there. But here's the part they didn't see. Amelie didn't cry. Didn't flinch. When they asked if she had anything to say, she looked straight into the lens of that phone camera and said, "I didn't take nothing. But I know why they think I did." That sentence stayed with me. It wasn't just about that hotel, that chain, that manager. It was about every time the benefit of the doubt was handed to someone else. Every time someone like Amelie had to prove she was good just to be seen as human. Every time a whisper was treated like a confession. They thought they buried her in that lie. But they didn't realize she'd already started digging her way out with facts, with time cards, with the steady weight of truth. And me? I was watching, paying attention, taking notes, because something told me this wasn't the end. This was just the opening statement. I didn't recognize her at first. Not because she looked different, but because she carried herself like someone who had walked through fire and didn't burn. When Amelie stepped into that courtroom, there was no apology in her stride. No shame hanging off her like a heavy coat. Just calm. Straight shoulders. Braids pulled back. That same teal uniform, pressed so sharp it looked like a statement all by itself. You know the kind of silence that fills a room when folks are waiting for something to go wrong? That was the air in courtroom 2A. The walls were beige, bland. But the looks weren't. Eyes followed her like they were waiting for her to flinch. They didn't get what they came for. I sat in the second row. The wooden benches creaked when you leaned too far forward, and I did because I had to see every move, every twitch of every face. Her public defender, a young woman named Carla with a tired smile and a bag full of sticky notes, whispered something in Amelie's ear. Amelie didn't nod, didn't blink, just kept staring ahead. Then Judge Easton walked in. You ever seen a man wear a robe like it was armor? Easton was one of those judges who didn't need to raise his voice. His silence said more. His gavel didn't just call court to order, it called everyone to attention. Even the dust in the air seemed to stop moving when he looked up. Case number 48327. Amelie Delane. Theft of personal property. He didn't look at her when he read her name. The prosecution stood. A man named Hartley, older, sharp, looked like he ironed his soul before coming to court. He shuffled a few papers dramatically, then walked up slow, like he was savoring the sound of his own steps. Your Honor, Hartley began. The facts are straightforward. A valuable gold chain went missing. The guest who reported it placed it on the dresser before stepping out. Miss Delane was the only employee assigned to that room between 10:20 and 11:45 a.m. that morning. When the guest returned, the chain was gone. No one else entered the room. No one else had access. The defendant had motive, opportunity, and no alibi. He paused for effect, then turned to the jury with a slow, deliberate pivot. This case is not about race. It's about responsibility, about trust. The kind of trust we give to employees when we hand them the keys to our privacy. Miss Delane violated that trust. He nodded as if it was all settled. But then Amelie spoke, and the air changed. I did clean that room, she said, loud enough to cut through the courtroom's stillness. But I never saw a chain. Her voice didn't shake, didn't rise, just was, and that seemed to bother Hartley more than if she'd screamed. Judge Easton narrowed his eyes. Miss Delane, you'll speak through your attorney. Amelie turned to her lawyer, who stood quickly. We'll save our response for cross-examination, Your Honor, Carla said. But I could see the faintest smirk tugging at her mouth, like she was holding back something loaded. The first witness was the hotel manager, Mr. Sutherland. He walked in with a clipboard and a pinched face like he'd just swallowed something bitter, swore his oath, sat down, adjusted his tie 4 times in under a minute. I've known Miss Delane for years, he began, and I was as surprised as anyone. But we reviewed the logs, and the timing speaks for itself. Carla stood up, calm, collected. Mr. Sutherland, are staff required to report valuables left out in guest rooms? He hesitated. Yes, technically. So if Amelie had seen a chain, she would have been required to report it? In theory, yes. And did she ever fail to report such items before?
No.
So, to clarify, you are accusing her of stealing something she never reported seeing, during a shift where no prior issues were recorded? Sutherland's mouth opened, then closed. That silence told me we weren't in the shallow end anymore. But before Carla could push further, Hartley objected. Speculative. We're here to prove what was done, not what could have been. Sustained, said Easton. Quick.
No hesitación.
Like he had the word ready. Amelie didn't react. She just glanced toward the gallery. For half a second, her eyes found mine. And I swear, right then I saw it. She had something she wasn't saying yet. Like a card tucked just beneath the table. The court recessed for lunch. Everyone shuffled out, murmuring. The reporters scribbled half-quotes. The jury kept their faces flat. But I stayed on that bench, heart pounding, because I knew the real story hadn't even started yet. They thought this case was open and shut. But Amelie? She had keys they hadn't seen. And when she used them, some doors were gonna come flying off the hinges. Afternoon light spilled through the courthouse windows like it was too tired to care what was going on inside. But I cared. Everyone in that courtroom could have been sitting in pews for all the worship they gave to authority. The judge's gavel. The prosecutor's words. The way Officer Klein stood at the back like a statue, hand resting just a breath from his holster. They trusted the system, trusted the titles, trusted the uniforms. But me? I was watching Amelie. Because while the others were listening to Hartley's next witness drone on about standard procedure, she was sitting there still, too still, calm the way quiet water is before a storm hits. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes didn't wander, and I could feel it, like gravity pulling me forward. She was waiting for her moment. When the time came, Carla stood and asked the judge, "Your Honor, we'd like to call Amelie Delane to the stand." The room didn't move, just blinked. You could tell they thought she wouldn't testify, like she'd sit there and shrink, let the accusations chip away at her until all that was left was doubt. But she rose smooth and steady, walked to that witness box with the same grace she used to carry trays of towels up 14 flights when the elevator was broken. She raised her right hand, swore the oath, then she sat, and turned the room upside down. "Miss Delane," Carla said, "can you tell the court what happened on the day in question?" "Yes." Her voice didn't tremble. It wasn't loud, but it landed. Clear. "I was assigned floors 3 and 4 that day. Room 413 was one of them. I entered just after 10:30. Was the room occupied?"
No, Amélie replied.
It had been vacated. Guest had checked out. A flicker across Hartley's face. Not panic. Just the first crack in his certainty. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, cutting in without permission. Carla raised an eyebrow, but before she could object, Amelie turned to the judge. "Can I answer that?" Easton nodded once. "You may." Amelie reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Carla stood quickly and handed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. "It's a printout," Amelie said. "I requested it from HR the week after they let me go. It's a copy of my shift log. There's a digital timestamp from when I scanned into the room with my keycard. 10:33 a.m. Easton studied the paper, passed it to Hartley, who frowned as he read. The guest in room 413 had already checked out at 9:48. The hotel's own log confirms that. They didn't return. A beat, then another. Hartley blinked. Then how did they report the missing item? "That," Amelie said quietly, "is what I'd like to know." She leaned forward just slightly. Not aggressive, not angry, just controlled. "There was no one in that room after I cleaned it. The chain wasn't listed on the guest's itemized checkout report. I wasn't even the last person to enter." That made Hartley's neck stiffen. "Excuse me?" he asked. Amelie nodded toward Carla again, who lifted another document. "This is a maintenance order," Carla said, voice calm, "filed by the engineering team. A technician was assigned to fix a loose door hinge in 413 at 1:15 p.m. the same day. His keycard shows entry at 1:12. Exit at 1:39. She passed it to the judge. "You'll see Amelie's keycard was the last entry before that. No one in between." Easton's face didn't change, but the room? You could feel it shift. That smug confidence from the morning? Fading. "What are you suggesting, Miss Delane?" Hartley asked, trying to reel it back in. Amelie didn't flinch. "I'm not suggesting anything, sir. I'm just pointing out the facts you overlooked." Hartley tried to recover. "And you expect us to believe the chain disappeared after the guest left, after you cleaned the room, and somehow resurfaced as stolen, without you having anything to do with it?" Amelie tilted her head. "Do you expect me to believe I was the only one questioned?" A pause. "The maintenance man," she continued, "did he get brought in for questioning? Or was it easier to point the finger at the black woman with the cleaning cart?" You could hear the breath leave the room. Easton cleared his throat. "That's enough, Miss Delane." "No," she said, not loud, but solid. She looked straight ahead. Y'all called me a thief in front of cameras. Took my job, my peace, my name. I'm just making sure you remember what the truth actually sounds like. Carla put a hand on Amelie's shoulder. Just lightly. The judge recessed again, this time without eye contact. As the room emptied, I stayed seated, watching the bench, watching the place where she'd sat, where she told the truth not like it was a performance, but like it was oxygen. Just necessary. She didn't break. She didn't bend. But I had a feeling someone else was about to crack. Because we weren't done yet. Not even close. The room was still buzzing from Amelie's testimony when the prosecution called their next witness. Your Honor, the state calls Craig Benson, head of hotel security, Hartley said, voice less sure now. Craig looked like a man who ironed everything. Shirt, pants, his expression. He took the stand stiff as a board, swore his oath like it was a formality, and began. We reviewed Miss Delane's keycard usage, he said. She entered room 413 at 10:33 and exited at 10:57. This matches our internal logs. Carla stood. Just to confirm, sir. 24 minutes inside the room? Yes, standard cleaning time. Carla paused, then flipped a page in her binder. Earlier today, your manager, Mr. Sutherland, testified that Miss Delane was in the room for 10 minutes. Which is correct. Craig blinked. He may have been estimating. And you're saying you personally reviewed the logs? Yes. So why didn't Mr. Sutherland reference the same logs? Aren't you both working from the same system? Craig shifted. I don't know. Carla stepped forward slowly. Would it be fair to say, either you or your manager is lying to the court? Objection. Sustained. But the damage was done. The jury was no longer just listening. They were watching. Craig Benson looked straight ahead like he could will the moment to pass. But courtroom silence doesn't fade, it settles. Carla let the pause linger. She didn't rush. Let the jury chew on it. Then she asked, quietly, Mr. Benson, are the hotel's security cameras synced to the electronic key logs? Yes. Do they confirm Miss Delane's time in and out of the room? He hesitated. Yes. Though the hallway camera near room 413 was under maintenance. Carla didn't flinch. Convenient. So no video to corroborate her entrance or exit. No. But the keycard data stands. She nodded, then asked the one question that cracked him open. Who had access to the master key ring that day? Craig froze. The moment stretched. Carla waited. The judge leaned in. Finally, he said, management, security, and concierge. Amelie didn't look up, but I saw her fingers tighten on the edge of the table. Concierge? Carla asked. Yes. Anyone in particular? He swallowed. Lisa Roman. Carla turned. The same Lisa Roman who wasn't scheduled to be on the 4th floor? Craig shifted again. She wasn't assigned to that floor, no? But he didn't say she wasn't there. He didn't have to. The silence said it for him. The moment Lisa's name was spoken, you could feel the prosecution bristle. Hartley stood fast, already trying to close the door. Objection, Your Honor. Defense is leading this into irrelevant territory. Judge Easton didn't even look up. Overruled. If a member of hotel staff had access to the room, she's relevant. Carla nodded slowly. Then, Your Honor, the defense calls Lisa Roman to the stand. And just like that, everybody turned. Lisa sat 2 rows behind the prosecution, neat blouse, company name tag still pinned. She looked like she'd hoped no one would notice her. But now, all eyes. The bailiff called her forward. She moved stiffly, cheeks pale. Swore her oath with the quiet voice of someone who's never spoken in front of this many people. Carla didn't waste time. Miss Roman, were you on the 4th floor the morning of the incident? Lisa looked down. Yes. Why? I went to drop off a pillow someone requested to 411. Then I got confused. The floors all look the same. Did you enter room 413? A long pause. Then, no. But her voice broke a little when she said it. Carla took 1 step closer. You sure? Lisa blinked. Just once. Amelie didn't move. But she was watching everything. The air was too still. Not courtroom still, guilty conscience still. Lisa gripped the edge of the witness stand like it might steady her. Her eyes darted toward Hartley, but Hartley didn't look back. He was staring straight ahead, jaw clenched. Carla stayed quiet. She could feel it too. Lisa was on the edge of something. And then, in a voice so calm it cut through everything, Amelie spoke. "Lisa," she said gently, "what were you holding when you saw me?" Lisa turned her head. Slowly. "I don't remember." "Yes, you do," Amelie said, still seated, still composed. "It was the master key ring. You dropped it. You bent down fast. Like you didn't want me to see it." Lisa blinked hard. Her lips parted. "Objection," Hartley tried. "Sustained," Easton said. But his eyes didn't leave Lisa. "Miss Roman, answer only what you're asked. If you feel the need to clarify anything, you may." Lisa looked cornered, but not by the judge. By truth. Carla stepped in now. "Miss Roman, why did you lie about being in 413? Lisa didn't answer. She just looked down at her lap. "And the room?" It leaned forward. Lisa's eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. She just looked like someone who'd finally run out of places to hide. "I didn't take it," she whispered. Carla's voice stayed steady. "Take what, Miss Roman?" Lisa swallowed. "The chain." Gasps whispered through the gallery. One juror shifted, arms crossing. Another leaned forward, eyes locked. Carla didn't move. "You're saying you saw the chain?" Lisa nodded. "It was on the nightstand. Room 413. "And what did you do?" "I was only supposed to check the pillow delivery," Lisa said, fast now, like a dam cracking. "But I saw it sitting there. No case. Just gold. Out in the open." She paused. "I didn't steal it. I didn't. But I told someone about it." Carla's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Lisa hesitated, then looked toward the gallery right at Mr. Sutherland. "I told the manager." The man froze. Carla turned slowly. "Did he ask you to write a report? Submit a statement?" Lisa's voice shrank. "No. He just said, 'Don't mention it.'" The jury didn't move. But their silence had a new flavor now. They were listening differently. Defense calls Marcus Sutherland to the stand. His name rang like a challenge. He stood slowly. No smug grin this time. Just a flicker of something behind the eyes, regret, maybe, or calculation. Same thing sometimes. He took the stand with practiced ease. Swore in, adjusted his tie. But his hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. Carla didn't smile. She didn't need to. "Mr. Sutherland," she said. "You're the manager of the Crown Meridian Hotel?" "Yes." "You remember the day in question?" "Yes." "You told Miss Roman not to mention a gold chain she saw in room 413. Why?" Sutherland blinked. "I don't recall that conversation. Even though she testified under oath just moments ago?" "She's mistaken." Carla stepped closer. "She said she saw the chain. She told you. And you told her to stay quiet." "That's not how it happened." But his voice cracked just slightly on the word how. The jury heard it. So did Amelie. From the defense table, she finally raised her eyes to him. And this time he looked back. It was the first time since the arrest he dared meet her gaze. And in that moment, something flickered. Not guilt. Fear. Because Amelie wasn't just a maid anymore. She was the one thing he hadn't expected. A witness who remembered everything. Carla opened a folder and lifted one small piece of paper. "I have here a guest report from room 413, dated the day of the incident." She turned to the jury. "Nowhere in this form does the guest mention the chain. Not in the missing items section. Not in the final checkout." She faced Sutherland. "Mr. Sutherland, when was the missing chain first reported?" He hesitated. Carla didn't blink. "Because this form says the guest left at 9:48 a.m., Amelie entered the room at 10:33. The guest was gone." He looked toward Hartley, who didn't return the glance. Sutherland cleared his throat. "The guest called later that evening. Did they speak with you?" "Yes." "Did you write a report of the call?" Silence. "No," he admitted. Carla nodded. Calmly. So we have no written complaint. No official report. Just your word. Sutherland's voice shrank. Yes. And when you learned Miss Roman saw the chain, why didn't you report that? He looked at Amelie again. But this time it wasn't fear. It was something lower. A kind of shame that sat in the chest and didn't move. I didn't think it mattered, he said softly. Carla stepped back. Didn't matter, she repeated. She let the words hang. Because now the jury was filling in the rest. Sutherland stepped down, shoulders hunched under a silence he couldn't argue with. The jury didn't look at him. They looked at Amelie, not like a suspect anymore, like someone they had almost misjudged. The judge called for final statements. Hartley stood, but the fight had left him. His closing was flat, a limp recollection of circumstantial patterns and logical deductions. The kind of words people reach for when they've got nothing left but pages and pride. Then it was Carla's turn. She didn't pace. She didn't raise her voice. She walked to the center of the room and just stood. This case, she began, is not about a missing chain. It's about a system that decided who looked guilty before a question was even asked. She turned to the jury. You were told Amelie was the only one with access. She wasn't. You were told she had no alibi. She did, their own key logs proved it. You were told to believe silence meant guilt. Carla looked toward Amelie. But Amelie Delane spoke, not with noise, not with anger. She spoke with truth. And in a courtroom like this, that's the loudest sound there is. She stepped back. The courtroom held its breath. Then, all rise. The jury filed back in just under an hour. The foreman stood, voice steady. In the matter of the state versus Amelie Delane, we find the defendant not guilty. The air cracked open, not with gasps but with exhale. I looked at Amelie. She didn't cry. She closed her eyes, bowed her head. Just for a moment, the judge dismissed the case. The gavel fell like a final beat in a long, aching. Reporters, strangers, staff from the hotel, the same place that stripped her name, would now have to say it loud. Song. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Carla stood beside her. Silent support. As Amelie stepped down the stairs, two uniformed officers, the same precinct that once cuffed her, stood to the side. She paused. They looked at her. One of them, Officer Hughes, gave a half nod. Not apology. Not respect. Just the bare minimum. Then he said it. The phrase they always use. We were just doing our job. Amelie didn't flinch. She looked past him and walked forward, because they might have been doing a job, but she had just done justice.